Hello and welcome to the Wire podcast. We are your hosts, Ethan and Keith Harry.
Harry, yeah, it's what half of the videos on this channel now. It's just us two talking about TV shows
that we both watched, but the other two just watch anime, so we can't really include them in it as much.
I mean, Johnny has the season 1 Wire DVD.
He does, and he could easily watch it if he wanted to, and then try and get up to date, and we could wait for him, but it just doesn't look like it's going to happen. I think he's too interested by other stuff, isn't he?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because we did season 1 and 2 of The Wire. I think you thought it would be season 3 next, but no, we hit you with that Sopranos out of nowhere. And now we're back to The Wire.
Yeah, people definitely didn't see that coming. It's a huge shock.
So last podcast, I think you were watching season 5 of The Wire.
Wait, did we record series 1 and 2 while I was doing series 5? Did we wait until
No, I think you were doing it.
Okay. Alright. Yeah, so I finished series 5, and spoiler alert, series 3 is probably the best season of the show.
I mean, I think if we're talking, I don't know if this episode is just going to be series 3 or 3 and 4, but if you're a real man, you're talking about The Wire, you can throw the first 2 seasons. I get that shit out of my face. Fuck off season 5. It's all about season 3 and 4, for which is the best season of The Wire.
Yeah, well, series 5 is kind of crappy for obvious reasons, but I think series 1 and series 2, you always talked about going back to them after having watched the show completely would be quite weird because it's so kind of simple, isn't it, at the start of the show? Whereas series 3 and series 4, it just chucks in a load of new characters, a load of new conflicts, and it feels more like a developed show where you're seeing every section of the ladder. Whereas with the first 2 seasons, it's just here are the cops doing the case and here's the criminals, and you don't really get more of the different levels in in society in Baltimore.
Well, season 2 kind of makes the logical leap of there's the same cops, new criminals, but you still follow the old criminals. So you kind of got those 3 parallel storylines. And this season, season 2 had done such a good job of telling the Barksdale story, kind of building that up, the whole D'Angelo being killed, spoilers, but why the fuck are you listening to this? The relationship between Stringer and Avon, the whole prop show stuff. So when you go into season 3, you just start right out the gate. The target is Stringer Bell and his organisation. Avon's getting out of prison. These are the people. And instead of that third strain that was the port, now we're looking at the politics.
But the politics, if you look at all 3 of the different plot lines, the politics is the one where I think Tommy Carcetti is. I wouldn't say that he's far removed from the plot, but he almost behaves above it. In essence, he's kind of got this overarching, overlooking point of view where it's his pressure that creates things to happen down the line, isn't it? He's someone who's unhappy with the state of things in Baltimore. Crime's on the up. He hates Jude Stacks, everything like that. And he's the one who's kind of started. We haven't started Comstat. I think Burrell probably started Comstat, but he's the one trying to get the ball rolling. So he puts pressure on Burrell and Rawls, and they put pressure on their lieutenants, and that's what causes Colvin to end up doing what he does, which is one of the core parts of Series 3. And then things that they do end up having repercussions down the line with Stringer, down on the street, and everything like that. And I think maybe the best quote from The Wire is something that Lester says in one of the seasons where he says every piece matters. And I think there isn't a single season of the show where I feel that as much as Series 3, where I would look back on it as a whole and think, God, it really felt like the cause and effect, the sense of consequence, you wouldn't feel it as much as you would in Series 3, where it feels like every action will have reverberations down the line. Everyone is affected by everything. There's this massive chain, this massive web connecting all of the characters, connecting every institution, and you can't make one change or make one effect in one without something else happening in one of the others. With Series 1 and Series 2, you're obviously not going to have that because it's fairly simplistic. But in Series 4, I feel like you have the political system and then the educational system working together quite closely. But I think that I think where it kind of isn't as good for me is the street stuff. I don't think is. I think the street stuff is too removed from the political stuff. Whereas in Series 3, everything feels like it's so tight, it's so connected. And I think a lot of it just comes down from Carcetti realizing he wants to run for mayor. So he just puts that pressure down, and you see everything just go from the top to the bottom in one season. It's fantastic.
I think season 3 is I mean, as you said, starting to do this thing where it's now about systems, and we're gonna have political. We're not gonna be afraid the audience is gonna keep up. We're just gonna start straight ahead. There's all these new characters you're gonna follow. In season 3, I think I agree with you that the police stuff is probably more tied into the political stuff, because you see a lot of the internal politics of the police.
Yeah,
so you get a lot of Comstat meetings. Carcetti's running is heavily involved with the police. Whereas season 4, I think actually we're not talking about season 4, but the most impressive thing about it is that the thing that the show was sold on is now a minor part of the show. It's about Carcetti's run for mayor. It's about that entire election, and it's about schools. Schools play such a big part of it. And I think the way I kind of disagree with you a little bit is that it shows how Avon Barksdale is born, how Stringer Bell is born, where these people come from, by giving you these 4 kids, and you follow their journey and how it relates to the drug game. Instead of getting the cops going after the number 1 guy, you're following a bunch of cops fucking around, failing to get the number 1 guy, whilst you're following these kids and how their lives relate to the drug game. I think that's great about season 4.
I see what you're saying. I guess what I meant more is that in series 3, it felt like no, actually, I'll talk more about series 4 really quickly. So in series 4, there's one really, really great episode, maybe halfway through, maybe a third through, where it's election day, and all of a sudden every single character feels involved in it somehow. You've got a couple of the kids delivering out flyers. You've obviously got Carcetti being involved somehow. You've got Mayor Royce as well trying to run against him, and that was the interconnectedness that I felt was lacking throughout the rest of the season, where of course decisions to one institution will have repercussions in other institutions, but in series 4 it felt like there were only really a few times where there was this sense of crossover, where you almost saw. I think what makes that episode, the 4th series, so great is that you see the electoral race through so many different perspectives. You see how everyone's affected by it. You see how people at the top, because they're directly involved, it's very important to them. But for the people at the bottom handing out flyers, that's just a way to get money, and stuff like that. Whereas series 3, for me, it really felt like a step up from the first 2 seasons. The first 2 seasons, like we've said before, time and time again, they're not really slow paced, but it feels like things take time. Whereas series 3 chucks you straight into it, and I felt like there was always something really exciting happening all the way through series 3. I got an adrenaline rush watching it, and I ended up watching the series at such a crazy pace because it felt like it was just a step up in pace. And I don't think that the show ever really matched that sense of pace that the 3rd series had. I think what I liked about series 4 was I wanted something that kind of took it down a notch a little bit. It kind of took its time again. And it never took its time in the same way that the first series did, where it was all about building a case from the start up. Series 4 still chucks you into it, but it still feels a bit cooler. It still feels like it, like I said, like it slowed things down a little bit, like it wanted to take time again, because it realised that series 3 was such a, I mean, you can hear it in the theme song. I mean, the series 3 theme song, it sounds very industrial. There's a lot happening in the space of a couple of minutes. A lot of different sounds, that kind of a couple of metallic tones in there. It feels very, very heavy. The series 4 theme feels a lot more laid back. It's down with the kids, and I really like the way they contrast coming off the back of one to the other. What I really wanted was something that just took its time again, and series 4 absolutely had that.
I think in terms of the pacing, I think series 3 does a really smart thing, but I know I'd like it more on a rewatch because I know how it's working. Where
it chucks you into the case, is that what you're going to say?
Straight away you're into the case, and you're like, okay, we're going a million miles an hour. There's a lot of pressure on murder rates. Every murder that happens, you suddenly feel you're like, okay, this is like really important because you're getting the statistics behind it, as well as they're trying to make the case and it's not going well, which I think a season's otherwise not started in the middle of the case. And that's the fast stuff. And the first 2 episodes, it's really fast. You're in the mix, and that's what's happening. And they have a couple of slow burn stories with 2 of the new characters, who are maybe 2 of the best characters in the show, in Colvin and Fatty, who I'm sure we'll go more in depth on. So you've got this thing going a million miles an hour. That's the A story, and the B story you're just seeing Colvin's like brain kind of ticking a lot, and it takes about 4 or 5 episodes for him to come up with his plan. And then by the time you realise that the investigation into Stringer is kind of fucking up and they don't really know what they're doing, suddenly this mad thing that's like maybe even with the stuff in series 5 the least realistic thing in the show, but you just believe it because it really took its time. And not only do you have that, but then you also have Cutsy's story, which is really engaging, and like it's mad that pretty much the best 2 characters of the show are just introduced in season 3.
Yeah. Well, so Colvin is technically introduced in series 2, but
Yeah,
you are absolutely right. I mean,
true.
series 3 is really Colvin's season. I mean, even more so than series 4 because he's kind of he's in the spotlight. So for people who have not watched the show, but even people who have, we'll give you a quick recap. So Colvin decides in the 3rd series to set up this kind of system because it's the last few months before he retires, so he wants to try something new, something a bit adventurous, a bit just very, very different.
He does a really cool speech. He kind of in these stats meetings he realises that pretty much his entire life's work's not working. He does a really cool speech about those paper bags.
Yeah,
they found a compromise.
Yeah. And then a couple of episodes later, you see him start planning something. And I mean, I knew what it was because you told me going into the show. But even while knowing what it is that it's leading up to, it was still very exciting. You know, that scene where he goes to an abandoned neighborhood, a vacant, and you'd be like, yeah, this could work just fine. And you'd be like, what's going on? What has he got planned? This really radical idea. I want to see what it is. And the funny thing is, you probably at that point wouldn't know what it is because he makes a joke at that point where a couple of the high-ranking lieutenants and majors are in the elevator. I think Valchek's there, Daniels is there, and they ask as Colvin's getting in the elevator, "Oh, Colvin, what are you gonna do about drugs? I mean, it's such a crazy problem. Rawls is hammering us with these stats." And Colvin says, "Oh, you know what? I think I might try legalizing them." And everyone just kind of chuckles, but he's got this smile on his face. You know, that's exactly what he's gonna do.
And then you get the bit where Rawls realises he's legalised drugs.
Yeah, that's great. And we will definitely get to that because something that Series 3 did so well was make administrative processes really fucking fun and interesting to watch. And I don't know how they did it. Those constat meetings. When you describe someone, there are scenes in a show where police officers and high-ranking officials get together and talk about murder rates and statistics, and it's called Comstat. You think, God, that has to be the most dull part of the show. But they're really good scenes. I do like them a lot because it's a key part of the process. Like I said earlier, you really want this chain of command, and Comstat really helps that. You know, Carcetti, he hits Rawls and Burrell with stats, so then Burrell and Rawls are like, well, you know what, it's not really our fault, we'll hit down the chain, you know, it's your fault, and then those majors and lieutenants kind of go down their chain, they go, no, it's your fault, you go out and you do something. And Colvin is the first one to actually take initiative and come up with a system for legalizing drugs that actually works to some effect.
I think this might be a little bit of just how media works, that they very much can play with your emotions and how they want you to feel about Amsterdam. Initially, it's a lot of comedy scenes, and then when it first happens, they make it look like hell, like a point of view, like scene of bubbles walking through it, and literally it looks like Bloodborne, you know, like it is just absolute hell.
That's so true.
But then as more and more things like Carver gets involved and Cutty after we'll talk about his earlier storyline, but he gets involved and they make it real, like it's got problems, but this is a genuine solution that's working. I think they do a really good job of convincing you. But there are those scenes where it just does seem like the worst place in the world.
Yeah, so there's that bubble scene, and there's also the one scene that's like, okay, you should just not have done that, but at the same time I can understand why you did it. Where a Carver picks up the body down in Amsterdam and brings it. So he moves the crime scene elsewhere to cover Colvin's back.
I really was on Carver's side that I wanted this thing to work. But at that moment, I'm like, you know what? I'm actually on Herc's done the right thing here. Which I never think about anything. I think it's the only time I've ever agreed with Herc ever was in when Carver did that.
So I had the complete opposite thing. Where in the moment I was like, Carver, come on, why did you do that? But I had so much faith and conviction in Amsterdam that I almost didn't mind him doing that. And when Herc did report it to the journalist, I was really angry at Herc because it has flaws, it has problems, and it's not perfect, but it is working. The best thing about Hamster, what makes it so great, the show, it doesn't hammer you with this, but it does highlight it, is that it's about meeting these people halfway, isn't it? You know, all of these strategies and these systems for trying to fight drugs don't work because it's so oppressive, and it's about treating people like criminals. Whereas Colvin, what he comes up with is a system where he doesn't. It's not about trying to just basically incarcerate everyone. It's like, you know what, you guys are down here at the moment, but I'm going to bring you up to my level and treat you like human beings. You know, if I scratch your back, you'll scratch mine. We'll come up with a system that works, that avoids bloodshed. And the great thing about it is that through that system of mediating, he actually creates something that does have a very positive effect on the community. He gets a ton of letters from people who are happy that their street corners aren't infested with drugs anymore. People can get about their daily life, you know, because what he does is he basically moves all of the drug trafficking and all of the drug trade into three different areas around the west side of Baltimore, in the Western District. And he doesn't just do that. He actually creates this system of bringing in medicine, antibiotics, contraception as well into these safe zones too, to try and make them easier to live in and work in. So it really is. I was so behind Amsterdam. I was behind it until the very end, and it was a shame that. It was a shame that it basically ended up becoming used as a political tool where the people who were involved got fucked over and the people who weren't involved basically just used it to further their political gain or their political loss, basically.
I think it does a really good job of presenting it as, I guess, in like a utopian ideal of like, we're going to examine this and what would happen if it was allowed to happen. And like, it would have negative aspects, you know, and it would also have positive aspects. And it's up to the audience to determine it. But there's also a sense of this thing as a time bomb. That we're seeing, we've got such a thorough look at the politics of this, and that we're getting that Carcetti wants to run for mayor, and this whole thing. So we know, and you just know it's all going to come crashing down. And then there's I guess it's probably best symbolized in Mayor Royce in the final few episodes, where he finds out about it, and he finds out he like the audience is kind of thinking positives and negatives. You know, like could this happen? You know, because this is a solution to problems that American cities like Baltimore are facing.
Yeah.
But then you realise, like no, this could never happen. Like the United States government are coming in and getting involved. Like when this, and then he's like, why do they even consider it? Just because the politics of this thing, especially the United States, which I guess still is having a war on drugs and a war on terror and a war on other shit. You know, it just couldn't happen in the United States because they would rather let bodies drop on these corners and people die rather than do something radical to try and like fix the problem.
Yeah, and that's really the great thing about it. They're called safe zones for a reason. He doesn't just say, "Do your drugs there. We won't bother you." There's the added condition of don't be violent. You know, treat this like house. Well, we'll talk about Scream and Abel, I'm sure, in a ton of detail in a minute.
Because we haven't even mentioned.
We haven't even mentioned like the other great
probably
parts.
The best thing about this season.
Yeah. Anyway, so Amsterdam is 100% something that I was like. There were moments where I doubted it a little bit, like that Bub scene where it just seems like an actual nightmare come to life when you get his perspective. And then the scene where Carver drags the body out of the safe zone to just one of the street corners to try and keep Amsterdam secret. Apart from those two moments where I just doubted it a little bit, I was always behind Amsterdam. I always thought it was a really, really great idea. And it's a radical thing to say, I know, but it is kind of a shame that this wasn't something that was picked up to some sort of greater effect, you know, because it worked well in the Western District. If there was some kind of like you said, utopian ideal situation where they were allowed to try and introduce this idea on a greater scale, you know, try and put it everywhere in Baltimore and see how that works, maybe it would have had a great effect, and I actually think it would have done. I honestly thought Amsterdam was a great idea. It was the fact that you told me going into this season when you were trying to get me. I was watching The Sopranos, I think, at the time, and you said, Ethan, you got to watch The Wire. I'm like, on series 3, it's so great. There's this policeman that they introduced, and he has this idea for fighting drugs, and it was a bit slow at first, but now it seems like every character is directly impacted by this, and it's just fucking great the way that it's worked out. And I was like, I gotta watch the show. I gotta see what this is.
Season 3 was like what made, because you've seen the first season. You've seen the first 2 and started season 3.
That's it.
And the start of season 3, I think on a rewatch it would be better, but it is it's not as good as the rest of it. But I really wanted to get you to watch it just because of how it's not just that. I think it's how the Stringer and Avon stuff starts to unfold in the last few episodes. When Omar gets involved in Brother in the Zone and all of that as well. Where I was like, this is so good. These are some of the best TV episodes I've ever seen.
Definitely.
But yeah, I guess what we haven't mentioned about like kind of almost why Amsterdam was tried this season is that the towers have fallen.
Yeah.
Kind of Stringer and Avon, season 2, they were kind of butting heads over the whole fact that they have no product, but they have the territory, and they wanted to kind of go into this co-op with Prop Joe, what Stringer did, because he's like a kind of businessman, whereas Avon's more of like a kind of street guy. And you just kind of see that like clash really kind of highlighted at the end of season 2. And then season 3, towers fall, suddenly that kind of prime real estate is gone, so they have to go back to the corners, and then while they've not been paying attention, this kid Marlowe has taken over the corners and he's not giving them up. So it's kind of Amsterdam ties in really well that they actually do have a place to go, to the fact that like the murder rate is up because these corners are now being contested, which I think is like a big thing that we need to mention, because that's kind of why the communities are so angry. That there's so much things happening on street corners because of largely Avon deciding to go to war with Marlowe, and Marlowe just being incredibly kind of ruthless.
But everything that you just said in the last couple of minutes is exactly what makes The Wire so great. It's that cause and effect, that sense of consequence, right? Like you said, there's the co-op. Towers come down to try and renovate the area. That leads to.
Before.
Yeah, go on.
A tower's falling down. It's a photo opportunity for Clay Davis and Mayor Royce. Like they can put their name on property and like get a re-election fund and make some money on the side. So all of that is also tied into the political stuff. Anyway, go on.
No, I was just going to say, towers come down for renovation. Marlowe's basically come and stepped up on these corners while they weren't paying attention. And then as a result, there's more violent crimes happening on the street corners. Murder rate goes up. The police aren't happy about it. There's pressure from Barrett and Rawls. That pressure has come from Royce, and then Royce is trying to is realizing that he wants to kind of run for governor, and that kind of links in with Royce's decision to bring the towers down in the first place, and there's this kind of like loop. Where just it's like any action that happens, it won't get resolved by the end of the episode. It will go on for the rest of the show, for the rest of the season. At the very least, everything is felt. The Wire is so just fantastic for that idea. Hang on. Should we talk about that or talk about Cutty first?
We'll do String and Avon, then we'll do Cutty.
Okay. Right. So the really great thing about Series 3 is you get this crossover between two administrations, the two main administrations in the show. The Stringer and Avon, which you see from Series 1, 2, and then 3. And 3 introduces Marlowe, and Marlowe's there from Series 3, 4, and then 5 to the end of the show. And you kind of see the different approaches, right? Because Marlowe's a lot more like Avon out of the two, isn't he?
But I think he has aspects of both in that way. I think he's got some. I think Avon is very like streetwise, but he always has a kindness to him. Whereas Stringer is ruthless and businesslike, and Marlowe almost is kind of like is the Michael Corleone, where he's got like the balance of their two traits.
I guess that's true, but by the end of the show,
by the end he's more of Avon.
He's just he could always ever be Avon. He's just too addicted to the streets, to that kind of like I guess to the dirt. More than anything, he doesn't really have that business-like strategy, because the whole thing is Series 3. Stringer, while Avon's still in jail, he sees this threat, and now that he's part of the co-op with Prop Joe,
I love the co-op.
he realises that this guy could be a legitimate threat, so the best thing to do is to try and get him in on the deal. Whereas Marlowe, I think having more of Avon and Stringer in him is like, no, I can do this by myself. I don't think this is going to work out. Or rather, I think for Marlowe, it's not that he doesn't think the co-op could work out. It's more that I don't think he wants anyone to have any power over him. I think he likes being the person in charge, and that's why he wants to have that real estate. He wants to have that sense of domination over certain areas of Baltimore, and doesn't want to give it up, no matter how many times Stringer and Prop Joe go and try and appeal to him.
I think
that eventually changes, doesn't it? But then it becomes like a later on in the season, Marlowe does end up becoming part of the co-op, but it's always for a wider ulterior motive to kind of try and take over it rather than just have his share of the deal.
I think Stringer's kind of problem is he thinks that he can be like a CEO of drugs, basically. That he can be completely legitimate, go like make money off like these real estate deals, with Clay Davis.
Yeah.
That's a subplot. But like there's always going to be someone like Marlowe who is going to play dirty and not kind of give it up, and it is a business kind of built on blood almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas I guess when Abel gets there, he's completely the opposite end, where he's like, we got to go to war with this guy, even though that kind of undermines the whole like Stringer and Prop Joe's idea of like cooperation and kind of working together. And I guess that clash between not only the ways they view the world and the drug game, but like their personalities. I think that's a great clash. You've got like scenes at the start of when Avon gets out and Stringer, like his party is trying to introduce him to these political figures that he has no interest in. Yeah. And then the revelation, should we go straight into this, about D'Angelo?
Yeah, that's a great scene towards the end, because I think that's probably, I mean, obviously it culminates in what it culminates with, but I think that's the moment where I guess I wanted more of a spark to come out of that, because when Avon finds out that Stringer was responsible for D'Angelo's death, it kind of looks like in the next episode that Avon, it's on his mind, but he's willing to go along with it. But there isn't. I honestly thought for the entire season that when Avon was going to find out about what happened to D'Angelo, it was going to completely break those two, and Avon was just not going to talk to Stringer again, and they were just going to separate and go on there and just go their own ways. But for the next episode, it looks like Avon's actually maintained that false pretense. And I'm not sure when the exact moment is that he decides that Stringer just has to go is, but I know that it definitely ends with Muzone, and Muzone comes to him and saying, look, we're going to take care of this guy. Do you have a problem with it? And Avon basically just tells him no.
Well, yeah, because Brother Muzone and Omar both have their individual kind of problems with Stringer that come out of season 2. Obviously, this happens in season 2, and I guess this entire thing kicks off when McNulty does one of his McNulty things, where he does some homework on what happened to D'Angelo, and puts what's her name? The mother.
No, I know who you're talking about. Was she called Brianne?
Brianna?
Or is Brianna the name of D'Angelo's girlfriend?
I don't know. Anyway,
yeah.
He put it's annoying we can't remember her name, but yeah, he puts the idea in her head that D'Angelo didn't kill himself, and then that kind of becomes a big kind of thing, and eventually why Stringer kind of confesses.
Yeah. Because in that scene, he's almost pushed to it, isn't he? Because Avon has been saying the whole season, right? You're not really first. You're not really as hard as you act, and that's what prompts Stringer to say, you know what? I'm harder than you will ever be. You could never have made the decision to take out your nephew, but I had to do that because I can risk us. I can risk Avon. I can risk her. I think she is called Brianna. Yeah. It is a very, very great scene. I mean, there's a reason on YouTube that scene is called Stringer and Avon tense scene.
You've got that's great, and it keeps on kind of culminating in the Marlowe and Avon are killing kind of more and more kind of important people to each other, so they're about to go to war. Slim Charles, another character we haven't mentioned, is great. Stringer gets fucked over by Clay Davis. Clay Davis being one of the best characters in the show still, because he always cons you with a smile on his face.
Yeah. Also, really quick, we'll talk about Stringer's death, obviously, but there's also the really. I think the third series starts off pretty strong as well, because I think you got some great episodes where there's that like, I don't know what you call it, but it's like an underground dog fighting ring or something.
Oh, Cheese's dog.
Yeah, Cheese's dog. There's just that great scene where they get him to confess and everyone's watching and they think, oh my god, they're going to cops these murders. But he's actually been talking about the fact that he shot his dog because they got him talking about his dog on the Wire.
I think the best thing about that scene is instead of having the scene where like they realize and she's just like, oh, that's not what I meant. They have that moment happening in the background, whilst in the foreground with the superiors are praising how good the investigation's going.
Yeah. So that's very funny.
But we haven't really talked about the police. Do you want to wrap up the kind of Stringer and Avon thing, or because I guess the police kind of relates to it, so maybe we should talk about the police
We
first.
even mentioned Praise Belusky shooting that guy. That's series 3, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that. I'm sure. Should we talk about Stringer's death first, and then try and talk about the police afterwards, maybe?
Yeah. So I guess things really culminate between Stringer and Avon.
And we've got Cutty to talk about.
We do. They betray each other. We're kind of skipping really ahead, and you get that great scene of those two kind of looking over Baltimore. And they both betrayed each other.
Yeah.
And it's such a fantastic.
Yeah.
I think in The Wire you get a sense when it's the last scene these characters have, and like that, even though it feels like it's still such a great moment.
Because there's something, like you always say, there's something kind of bittersweet about it. Because they're almost reminiscing about great times that they've had. Almost like they're both aware that it's kind of the end of an era, but none of them are willing to confess that they betrayed the other for obvious reasons.
So yeah, Avon gives Stringer up.
Yeah.
To the
In
people.
fact, Avon asks Stringer, what time are you going to be at the construction site tomorrow, just to check, and you think, well, I mean, at the moment I didn't think what the actual reason is behind it. I thought it was just a harmless kind of question, but it is because he wants to make sure that he's going to be there at the time that Omar and Muzone are going to show up to actually shoot him.
Okay, really quick. Okay, yeah, so that happens really quickly. Jumping into the investigation, this season really it does a thing where it goes into burner phones because they're using burners, so you can't get a wire on the burner, which I guess would have been a new concept to put on TV. So they really explain what burner phones are, even though you don't need to because that's in popular culture now. What a burner phone is.
Yeah.
But they have Stringer basically. They're like every time he makes a call, they're like, okay, we need like one more call, and then we have this information on him. So it's like that episode is kind of building up and up, and the police basically have Stringer, and then he gets shot at the end of the episode, and it's like it's really kind of like again bittersweet. And they would have been able to arrest him, but he's dead.
I know it's the worst for McNulty. He gets the toughest break because he has known Stringer Bell has been the real guy to go after for the whole of the show, and he's so close to catching him.
I think what I love is that you find Stringer's body. They go to his apartment. And it's like an IKEA kind of. It's like there's just books everywhere. It's incredibly neat. And McNulty, it just doesn't. He's like, who was this guy? And he realizes he just didn't know who Stringer was. Really, I really love that scene. But Stringer did leave one last present where Stringer gives up Avon to the police. Yeah, he rats them out. So mission accomplished. McNulty gets to arrest Avon, show him that Stringer was his source.
Spoiler alert: if you've got the DVD of Series 3, do not look on the inside of the pictures for the finale. And for anyone who hasn't watched the show,
the back of the DVD where it shows Avon in cups.
Yeah, that's really bad. That's really bad.
But yeah, so we touched a little bit on the police stuff and how that kind of final 2 episodes culminate. We think they're going to get Stringer, and then they have that scene of the two of them. They both betray each other, and then that ties into the investigation that's been going on.
And I also really like the scene where Omar and Muzone meet each other again, but it's in like a dark alleyway, and it's almost like a showdown standoff. But actually, and Omar thinks, okay, this guy's come back with a vengeance. But actually, what's happened is Muzone's come to him with a proposition.
I mean, those scenes of the two of them, I'm like, I don't know, is it fan service? Is it? They're both very stylized characters. Like in season 2, when Muzone's like, a man's got to have a coat, and Omar's like, indeed. Just them like teaming up, and but like Omar with the shotgun, and Muzone with like the little James Bond gun. It's like they're so stylized. It doesn't work, but I think I
always thought that Muzone was too stylized. Like he just looks too much like he doesn't look like a character that was born out of the streets.
It's like
the same way that Omar.
It's like a Malcolm X James Bond kind of.
Yeah, I know what you mean with the big glasses and maybe. I mean, I don't think Malcolm X ever wore a bow tie, but he dresses very well. He's very sophisticated, obviously, the way that he speaks, the way that he dresses. So he does have that kind of thing going for him. But and I talked about this in the last episode. I mean, I'll admit, right, that in the first series, Bird, Stinkham, and Weebay aren't exactly the most memorable TV characters of all time, but they're utterly realistic. And I think that they are set apart well enough that you can identify one from the other. Whereas Muzone feels he feels too much like a bold physical character to be kind of believable for this very gritty TV show. But I think Omar is as stylized as you can get without becoming too stylized, because I can believe a vigilante in Baltimore would go around wielding a shotgun around his chest with the cap that he has and the trench coat as well. I can believe that.
I think
His zone's a bit too far.
I think with Omar it becomes the thing every show has, where if the character almost becomes a parody of himself. But by season 5, it's like the character's like been pushed. It's like almost unrealistic, like the Omar plotline and that. Even though it's really like entertaining and great, it's like it's been pushed so far beyond with his first appearance in season 1.
That's right. But then the way that it ends is like a perfect combat against that kind of ideology, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because,
that's true. I guess we'll talk about that when it comes to season 5.
Yeah, we will.
Should we?
Cutsy's really good. Yeah, he's like Tony Blundetto, isn't he? But better.
Good version of Blundetto, I think. I think it's episode 2 maybe. Yeah, you see him talking to Avon in prison. He's about to get released. And I think it does a really good job of showing you why people reoffend.
Definitely,
because he comes out and just he's lost, like, everything about his world has changed. You know, like the corners that he remembers are like rust. Pretty much no work's been done on them. They're still run down. The game's got more fierce, as Slim Child says. The only kind of network or support he has, a job he can go into, is to go and work for Avon again. That's pretty much the only thing he can get guaranteed.
And it's really unfortunate as well, because he's not like the kind of character that leaves prison. He's not like, I know Weebay's got a life sentence, right, and he's never getting out of prison. But if he was, he would obviously get back into the game straight away, because that's the kind of person he is. Whereas Cassie is obviously someone who wants to improve his life. He wants to make something out of it better than what's basically given him all of this jail time. And he's so determined to try and do better by himself, but he can't help get roped back in, because society doesn't do a good enough job reintegrating him in with a job that he can rely on, and basically kind of income and housing that works for him. So that by the end of it, he can't help but get back into the game, because it's the only way he can survive.
Well, it's kind of like he gets out, and despite, I think he's done 10, 15 years, he gets no respect from anyone in the organisation. He kind of meets up with his ex, and she has no interest in getting back together with him.
Is his ex the school teacher in series 4 who talks to Prez a lot?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is. Also, he tries to, he's working this job, right, for very low pay, with kind of a bunch of immigrants. And it's kind of like a hard job for a really kind of shit pay, that is pretty much the only job he can get. And it takes him getting back into the game briefly, being unable to pull the trigger, to give it another go. And actually, I think the only reason that he kind of makes it is that the deacon, who's played by Melvin Williams, who's the real Abe Boxdale, really kind of reaches out to him and offers to help him. You know, and it's that kind of support that he needs. And eventually, with the help of Avon, in a great scene, he finds his good on purpose. He starts a boxing gym and is able to kind of help the kids, which we see a bit in season 3, but it's kind of a big thing in season 4. I think it's a really good kind of arc you go on with Cutty's character through each episode.
Yeah.
And it's not like from minute 1 he's then they make him the most likable person. You know, he gets out with maybe the intent of getting back in the game, and it's because it's changed so much and he doesn't want to do it all again, that he kind of finds another purpose.
But that moment, the moment where he's like, okay, I can't get back into the game, is when he's got someone at gunpoint that he's chasing down. I think he's wearing shades in the scene, and he's seconds away from doing what gave him 15 years in the first place. I think because he went in for murder, didn't he? And that would have been his moment to basically realise that he hasn't learned from his mistakes, that he's basically gone back in for what he did in the first place. And I think that's the moment where it's pretty obvious that's the moment he realises that this is something he can't do anymore. And then you get a great scene where he talks to Avon, and he basically says, I think this is cut out for me. Avon says something like, okay, that's fine. You don't want to do the heavy work, that's okay. I can use your brains, I can blah blah blah, and he cuts him off and says, no, I can't have anything to do with this anymore. And then he tries, and he just goes back to how he started, which is being a lawnmower, learning Spanish to talk to the people that he works with. And he tries again, I think even more determined than he was in the first place, which is really, really uplifting, because he could have easily gone into another downward spiral and landed back in prison, doing the exact same thing that he was in there for the first place, losing another 15 years of his life for manslaughter or whatever.
And then, I guess we also have, he decides to do the boxing, start a boxing gym, and it's just not going well. You kind of see how badly the boxing gym's going. He's trying to kind of, with the help of Carver, who I think has a really good, we've already talked about one of the big Carver moments this season. With Carver, he's trying to give these kids in Amsterdam something to do, and it's not going well until he goes to see Avon, and because of the way that Avon scene ended last, he's incredibly nervous about seeing Avon, and he's worried about what Avon's going to do if he asks for money, and Avon's just being the great guy he is, we love Avon. That's the thing. He gives them the money. I think Avon's interesting because season 1 he's such a threat, and then in this season, even though he is still a threat and he's causing people to die, just because of the contrast of how bad Marlowe is, you get nostalgic for Avon. You're like, Avon's not bad. He was a nice guy,
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think it's because the way they introduce Marlowe, he puts the iron ruthless. You see more of it in series 4 for sure. Where in series 4, if you're even seen talking to the cops, you have to go. So you just can't risk that. And in series 3, he definitely has that. He's got that kind of stone face, very he's just a very cold character. Because he doesn't show emotion very much. He seems quite he just seems very, very stone-faced, and you see that in his actions. You see how willing he is to protect his empire that he ends up growing a lot more in series 4, in a sense that he's so protective of it. And like you said, Avon, he doesn't seem nowhere near as bad a comparison, because Marlowe is someone who's willing to kill someone like that the second it becomes a threat. You really, really do see that a lot.
It's a good film as well. The Marlowe Stanford.
Hour 40 feature. Yeah, that's great.
Starts with that first scene with Bugs. Should we quickly just talk about the police, maybe? Just because we've
we've got to talk about the Bunk and Omar stuff in this season, which is really good as well. We've got to talk about Prez and that cop that he shoots later on in the series as well. There's a lot of really great stuff.
So I guess we've basically talked about Herc and Carver, right? That they go to the Western. A lot of you kind of see them in Colvin scenes, one that kind of agrees with it, one doesn't.
Yeah.
You got that stuff. After what happens with Colvin, you got Daniels who kind of takes over, and McNulty kind of also goes to the Western. His kind of arc this season is his kind of arrogant, just destructive McNulty.
He has this. He gets into an argument with Lester every episode of series 3.
He kind of corrupts Kima this season as well.
Oh my gosh,
ruins her personal life. But the two of them being self-destructive end up making this case by the end of the season, and he gets back together with woman from season Beatty from season 2.
Yeah, he does.
And he decides to not be in season 4.
Although having said that, right, series 3, I can accept Brotherhood's own because they've set that up, and it makes sense for plot reasons, right? So I don't think that's very fan servicey. What I think the first moment in the show where I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, but these two characters having met up and having a thing now, that's unrealistic. It's the DC woman,
Teresa.
Teresa.
Yeah, that comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. And I think as the show goes on, there's more moments like that where you get these pairings and things, characters and worlds crossing over that I'm like, sorry. What made The Wire so great at the start for the first few seasons was the fact that everything felt so every event would feel so naturalistically constructed. It just wouldn't. There'd be no fan service. There would be no contrived plot devices. It would just be everything would lead naturally from one place to the next in a way that just made sense and felt like it was almost a documentary rather than a TV show. But Series 4 has this one very specific school in Baltimore where just a lot of characters end up working at or being involved with, and I think that's a bit unrealistic. I can accept Cutty. Sorry, I can accept Colvin, but Cutty working there for it? No, I'm sorry, that's a bit too far. And I think you get more of that as the show goes on. By the time you get to Series 5, it's like, nah, sorry.
I think a point over Season 3 over Season 4 is that because they keep introducing more and more characters and more links, it feels less like these unknowable systems at play and more just individuals making individual choices. And I think that kind of undermines the message. But Season 3 doesn't have that problem because you still don't really know all of these forces that are kind of acting upon it because we haven't kind of been introduced to those like extra elements. So yeah, like you said, Bunk and Omar, that's a pairing that I think works really well.
Yeah. I mean, every time those two are together, it works out really well. You got some great Series 4 content as well, where Bunk bails him out of jail because he got arrested for the shooting at the convenience store, right? Of that woman. Yeah. So yeah, that stuff is always great.
You got a good backstory that I think they went to school together.
Although they were apart in years. I think they weren't the same age.
But they have like a similar background, and there's a respect because of what Omar's done in Season 1 for the police. But yeah, that kind of, I can't remember her name, but she's ended up dead. He basically knows it was Omar, and he just needs him to kind of speak up. Meanwhile, Bunk's trying to do real police work, has to recover Officer Dozeman's firearm because they're after the police are, as always, after a headline and are up against the press and the politicians rather than doing the real work. By juking stats, by doing busts that are undermining ongoing investigations like wiretaps, by instead of doing real police work, recovering the firearm.
Yeah. And then you have a really insane moment towards the end of the season, which goes to show some I guess quite unconscious racial biases that I guess people in the police force would definitely have, which is in press shooting a black police officer. What makes that scene work really so well? Actually, really quickly, retell me and tell the people who are listening that awesome fact about who fires guns in the show.
I think of the police officers in The Wire, the only one that ever fires a weapon is Presbeluski.
Yeah, which is pretty mad. So there's 2 times in the first series.
Yeah, he shoots the wall in the first series. He shoots his gun in the first kind of instance of seeing Presbeluski has this kind of unconscious racial bias when Herc and Carl would go down to kind of rough up these kids, and Presbeluski ends up blinding one of the kids.
And every single time he's used his firearm, it's been unjustified. The first time it was just stupidity. Second time it was him just abusing his power, and the third time was him just definitely, I think, panicking in the moment and not knowing how to act and making a split-second decision that really, really costed him and the life of somebody else. But what makes that scene work so well, and you've told me this time and time before, and I think you're absolutely spot on, is that I think a problem with the police force, right, is that, especially in The Wire, and I'm sure this is how most police forces work in the world, is that there's this expectation that everyone who is a police officer must be incredibly well-rounded and must be really, really great at every single aspect of the job. But obviously that's not going to happen. You're going to have strengths and you're going to have weaknesses. And like you said before, Presbeluski, he's fantastic with Lester. He's great behind the desk. He's a great surveyor. But out on the field, he's absolutely useless. And he doesn't have that same instinct, that same confidence that I think people like, I guess, McNulty would have more out on the field. And I think that in that case it's a bit more difficult for me to make that point because it's not like he was out there consciously on the job. They were just picking up Chinese. But at the same time, it just goes to show that people are so much better suited to other jobs than other people are. I don't know why the police force can't see that and try and make more of a conscious decision to split people off into different areas based on what it is that they're good at, rather than just expecting the impossible from everybody who works. Because then that's what it leads to. You get you get pressure on you to be the best you possibly can from everywhere, and it leads to scenes like that where you want to do the job, and then the way that your mind thinks kind of gets in the way, and you end up shooting someone who, I guess, in the moment you probably assumed was the person they were running after, but rather was a police officer.
I think it does a really good. It's a good idea of having this kind of this act happen, which is really horrible, and it's like a thing you like read about all the time. It's not like normally a police officer that's been shot, but just like two black men have been confused, or they've been assumed to be a criminal when they've done nothing wrong because of just like inherent racism and bias.
That's true.
But the person they have do it is a character you like. It's someone that, apart from those scenes in season 1, you haven't seen any of this. You wouldn't go, oh, that's a racist, because it's not all, racism isn't almost like something you can see. It's something that you can do. You're like, he has these like entrenched beliefs that he never really shows. It's not like he's like I don't know, being racist throughout the rest of the show. But it's a character you like's done this thing that happens, and it's kind of, as the audience, how are you going to react to the fact that he's done this? And I think
it's actually quite an original way to show that on screen as well, because I've seen plenty of films where white officers have shot unarmed black men in the films. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen. That obviously does happen. But it's weird to use the word refreshing in a situation like this. But it almost is refreshing to see, I guess, a more nuanced take on how a black person can be killed by a police officer. Because I think it's something that you don't expect, and like you said, it proves a greater point about things that we don't even realise about ourselves, right?
You see the police side of it as well, I think, which is interesting. You can't. I'd say it's very.
There's a lack of communication that scene between everyone, isn't it? No one really knows where he is.
I think it does a good job of not excusing the police for doing it, but actually making the even the harsher critique almost of showing how the police look after their own, and how it's a police officer that dies and the police officer that does it. So, and even if it wasn't a police officer that died, that police officer's not going to jail. Daniels, who is like a black officer, his black superior officer, makes him call a lawyer, even though Presbalewski wants to kind of be punished for it. He wants to, I don't know, go to prison or face the punishment. Daniels doesn't let him. You could say because he's looking after his friend and his employee, but also it's the police looking after the police, which is what happens in season 1 when Presbalewski does the same thing. Daniels is going to look after the police,
And there's almost another similar thing about, looking after your own. It's insane how things get blown out of proportion as soon as the police are directly involved with, I guess, fatalities. Because you've already seen that in season 1, right? For so much of the first series, that task force is constantly understaffed. It's underfunded. They don't have the resources they want to get what it is that their target. Second Kima gets shot. Everyone comes rallying from left and right. The superiors are everywhere. They're like, you know what? You get what you want to get the job done. It's insane how things change as soon as a police officer is in question. But yeah, and I think the best thing about that entire sequence, the best thing about it, is you don't see the shot, you see the aftermath. But the way that it's framed, the way that it's shot, you can tell straight away exactly what happened. The way that he's lying on the floor, you can see that he's black. You can see that you can see in fact, you don't see the badge straight away. Actually, I think it's McNulty that finds it later on in the scene. But Presbalewski is standing there. He's shuddering. He's not even stood upright. There's some shock on him. He is shivering. But just the way that it's framed, you don't need dialogue. You know exactly what happened. You know that he mistook him for the person that they've been running after. And he shot him for it.
I think it's a really shocking moment. I think it says a lot in the aftermath about how racism and how the police kind of deal with these kind of incidents. And it also, from a storytelling point of view, puts Presbalewski in a way more interesting place in season 4, where season 4 isn't about a wiretap. You don't get as much Lester in season 4, but it makes him possibly even the protagonist of season 4 as a teacher in the school, which is we'll get to it next time we do the season 4 podcast. But he's great, and I think a character who again is great in season 4, who, because of how much season 4 is about his storyline, we haven't really talked about him that much, is actually Carcetti, who's introduced in season 3 as a congressman who wants to run for mayor, and the season kind of ends with him being like, I'm gonna run for mayor, and it's him like him being told you can't do that, getting people in. He's got this relationship with Tony Gray, I think his name is.
Tony Gray.
Yeah. I think it starts with a witness being killed, and the kind of season also ends with that, maybe.
That's definitely a big talking point for him throughout the entire season, because there's this constant political like push and shove or pull and tuck. I don't know what the exact phrase is, but there's this trio happening between Burrell, Carcetti, and Royce, where they're kind of they're not really. They are kind of backstabbing each other a little bit and kind of playing each other because right at the top, right on top of this entire of a social hierarchy is these three guys trying to have it out between them because Royce wants to just stay in power, obviously, and he just won't accept any threat. And Carcetti is someone who wants to run for power, and he's upset with the way that everything's being handled, especially with Royce, and is constantly telling Royce, you got to do something about this. And Royce just doesn't have anything.
It's all happening through Burrell as well.
Yeah.
Where Carcetti is in a position for his role on the council, I guess, to put pressure onto Burrell. He can directly quiz Burrell and put him under pressure, and then the mayor is putting pressure on Burrell to kind of take that pressure and not push it up to him or blame him. So
Carcetti might even have one of the most developed and most well-written arcs in the entire show. You can see where he started and where he ended. I hated his guts by the end of the show just because of the kind of person he ended up being that he vowed never to be. But I remember in series 3, he was far and away one of my favourite characters because he was someone who basically came along, saw through the bullshit, and said, you know what, this city needs change, and the people who are in power right now aren't going to do it, so I'm going to try. But he's not someone who just wants power. From the start, just from the way he talks, from the way he behaves, he's someone who obviously wants to make a difference. He does care about the city, and you definitely get some of that. And then right at the end of the season, in I think the final episode of the penultimate episode, he makes this brilliant speech in front of the council about social care and having a greater sense of community, and that this is what we need. Just not only in Baltimore but throughout the entire world is just community and social care for one another. And it was speeches like that where I think I was just blown away by the end of it. I mean, I don't see how someone can listen to a person like that say those things and not root for them to want to win. So during this 4th season, I was on his side 100%. I would have been really angry if Royce had won. But obviously, Carcetti was always going to win because that's just how arcs work in TV and film.
I think it's a clever idea as well of introducing this kind of go-getting congressman who, again, you're rooting for because he believes all these things. And then it's a way of, because you've been introduced to him almost on the ground floor, when he becomes mayor, and now you have scenes in the mayor's office of the mayor of Baltimore making these high-level decisions. It doesn't feel like it's come out of nowhere because you personally know the mayor. You know what he believes in. And I think it does a good job. Because when you see Royce, you're like, oh, Royce, what an arsehole. How can he be like this? But Carcetti kind of becomes Royce.
He does.
You know, and you almost you don't like him for doing it, but you understand it because you're suddenly like, oh, now he's in charge. He has to eat shit, I think is the speech, which is definitely a season 4 thing. I remember also episode 1 of season 4. He's like in a losing campaign basically. And he's just like, he's tired, he doesn't want to do this anymore. Yeah. And I remember you being like, oh, I hate Carcetti now.
Yeah. I think I hated it because he just became more human. I didn't want him to be more human. I wanted him to be the Carcetti from series 3, who was almost two-dimensional in a way that he was just always so confident, always strong-willed. He always said the right thing. He was always a hard worker. He was basically like a perfect human being in series 3. In series 4 towards the start, you realise, oh no, he's just a lazy guy who just doesn't want to do this anymore. I think the first episode of series 4, half of it is just him in a room, just like twirling around in his chair, just like playing darts or something, because he just doesn't give a fuck.
You have to make those phone calls to kind of get money.
To get donors. But I mean, series 3 Carcetti, I loved him so much. Like, he was someone that within a few episodes, I was just behind him straight away, because having watched 2 seasons of a show where it felt like nothing could change, this was someone that I really wanted to believe in. And by the end of it, he gets caught up in the system that he was trying to fight, and he ends up juking the stats, and he ends up looking after himself and his kind of career in the greater run rather than staying as mayor and actually trying to do some good. He's in it for the long game, which is kind of a shame. But like we said, it doesn't come out of nowhere. I mean, we see where the pressure comes from. We've seen Nerys and the ministers. We see Clay Davis. We see all of these people constantly trying to, who have motives of their own. He's kind of caught up in between. He ends up having to make decisions to try and satisfy them rather than the people of Baltimore. I mean, it's a whole thing with Burrell staying on as police chief later on in the show, where he wants him to go because he's an awful police chief, and Burrell isn't very good.
Although I really like Burrell. It's one of my favourite things about Burrell. Is he's like, you got to resign. Burrell's like, no, sack me. He knows that he's not it. Like, that's probably my favourite thing Burrell does. Is just refuse to resign because he's been told to. I do. All right.
I think. Hang on, really quickly, right? To wrap up series 3, I think one of my favourite things about the series is that there were scenes and there were things and events in that series that were promised from the start of the season, and I was waiting for them to actually happen. And when it did happen, I was like, yeah, this is the fucking best TV show. And it was D'Angelo's not suicide coming back to light. I wanted to see how Stringer Avon reacted to that. They did react to it. It was fantastic. There was Colvin having Amsterdam happen in secret. I wanted to find out what would happen when the superiors, when his superiors got involved and found out about it. And that was a fantastic scene where he actually gets up on the stand and says, okay, this is Amsterdam. And like we said, Rawls says he's legalized drugs.
I think also the greatest moment of all time, which is finding out that Rawls is gay. It just suddenly gives his his macho posturing and kind of homophobic comments and casual sexism. It reveals it as the pretense that it is. But actually, it's all a lie to try and get ahead politically and socially. And just this one shot of him smiling in a gay club, that's all you need to make that character infinitely more interesting. Which I think it's one of the smallest moments in the show that it's just really great.
Yeah, I like it a lot. The great thing about that scene as well is it's not like it does kind of come out of nowhere, but it doesn't come out of nowhere in the sense that it's just a random. Yeah, why are we in there? There is a reason to be in that bar scene in the first place. Is it series? It is series 5. There's that really funny scene where Omar's got this guy at gunpoint and he's like. And he's like, okay.
Yeah.
He just doesn't react to having you come.
Yeah.
God, what are the funny moments?
I mean, we've talked about Cheese's dog. I think that's a great one.
I think we might even actually Stringer's death, right? I wanted to say one more thing about it. Stringer's death, right? He is a bad person. I kind of respected him at the start. And I liked his character because I liked, how careful he was. He's someone who realizes how fragile what he has is, and he wants to try and make sure that it's secure. In series 2, he becomes the most hateful character because he kills the Angelo who's responsible for it, and he just takes a massive dip at that point. But in series 3, I don't want to say he gets back into my good books because I never like him as a person again. But it did become so apparent to me how much of a good character he was and how much he probably is one of my favourite characters. Just because during series 3, he has such a hard time, doesn't he? I mean, it's like he has this belief in the system that to make the drug trade less violent is to engage as part of this co-op. In fact, it's almost like the other side of Colvin's coin, where he wants to try and make this all a bit more legitimate. Stringer has the same thing. And I kind of respect that, and I did believe it in some way, and I wanted it to work out. But then over the course of the rest of the season, he just has a string of really shit luck. He gets involved with Clay Davis, and Clay Davis just keeps milking him for money and just fucks him over. And by the end of the show, even though he's not physically on his last legs, it almost like this is the end for him. I mean, you can feel that he's kind of had his run, and this is where he's gonna be done. But by the time that he died, I was actually kind of sad a little bit. And I wasn't sad for the person that he was. I was sad for what he believed in. And I was sad for the bad luck that he had throughout the entire show, where I kind of wanted the things that he wanted, to work out. By the time season 4 happens and Marlowe is now the main quote-unquote villain, I really miss Stringer. Like, The Wire just never felt it. It was still great. Series 4 still one of the best seasons of TV that's ever existed. Full stop. But The Wire was never the same without Stringer. Right? I love D'Angelo. He's like my second favourite character after Colvin. But when he died, The Wire still felt like The Wire. But Stringer felt like such an integral component of that show that it never had the same feel to it without him there for me.
As sad as as kind of a bad as person as he is, there is like a sadness to his death, because I guess his story is kind of like a failure of the American dream, right? Like through Stringer Bell comes Simon Burns' critique of kind of capitalism and who gets to have this kind of rags to riches story.
Right.
Just because of Stringer's background and the game he's involved in, he can never be legitimate. You know, he can't ever be the CEO that perhaps like someone in a different, like a not legal line of work actually could be. And his kind of belief in and the kind of core of his being comes at odds with the reality of the world in season 3 in a way that you do feel sorry for him, because he does get fucked over and it's clear that he's on his last legs, like you say. So I think it does give his death extra weight and sadness, and it helps that he's played by Idris Elba, and he's just such a well realized character. He's fantastically performed, you know. And Marlowe, I think the message behind Marlowe's character is just less interesting than Stringer's almost. I think Stringer, they're trying to say more with like how Stringer acts, and he's like a very unique kind of character in like his beliefs and stuff. Whereas Marlowe is just kind of ruthless. He just is kind of like, I guess he represents the new generation coming up who are more kind of ruthless, which is what constantly happens in this show. But he is the less interesting villain or less interesting character. But I guess as an evil force, I think it made me even like Marlowe more, just because of through him you have like, let's just, for an example, when you watch season 4 and you get the song, it's just so much darker. And I feel like that's because Marlowe's the villain now. You got Chris and Snoop, you know, they're going into these row houses.
Talk about Chris and Snoop, they're great.
Who we do meet in this season briefly.
But not enough to actually have like a proper conversation about them.
But yeah.
I am completely with you. I think, Stringer Bell was someone who he was really, really well performed, and he met his death in, I think, in quite a sad way. There was something else I was going to say off the top of my head.
I think I'll mention in the finale that like really explicit lesbian sex scene with Kima. That was kind of like normally when we watch anime, I'm like, okay, that's unnecessary. But you know, when I watch things which is just like two adults having sex and stuff, I'm like, yeah, that's fine. But yeah, that bit was a bit gratuitous.
Yeah.
I felt like that shot didn't need to be in there.
I agree.
Yeah, just to show it's not just anime. I criticise for being sexy sometimes. I felt like that one shot wasn't great.
I think what I was going to say was that Marlowe became interesting in the penultimate episode of Series 5. That was when I was like, okay, Marlowe just is a really good character.
And that one scene.
Just that one scene, but that one scene is so good, it just changes the way that I thought about him for like 3 whole seasons. I think Marlowe in the 3rd series, I mean, his character is just that sweatband that he wears. Like, I don't. Yeah, okay, he was cold and he didn't really act with a lot of emotion or a lot of character. He was just kind of a blank slate, and he had that sweatband. But for me in Series 3, his character was always there to upset the status quo. He was there to put a spanner in the works between Abel and Stringer. He was basically like the catalyst that brought those two.
He's like the antagonising force, which is causing the characters that you have an emotional attachment in to kind of react to and have a lot of scenes in reaction to.
Yeah.
Is season 3 the one where they try to kill Omar and he's taking his grandma to church?
Yeah. They have a rule like
Sunday
you don't do
rule.
it on church day.
Yeah.
On Sunday.
Yeah,
That's
was
a whole thing.
That was great. Also, you get to see the picture of Omar when he was young as well.
Oh, yeah, that's so adorable. He's young, yeah. But why would you need to see him young when you got the Wire prequels?
Oh, God. Proposition J, you know, he's always making deals.
Gotta make a proposition.
Alright, should we wrap it up now?
Yeah, I think so.
We took so long for season 3. Like,
how long have we talked for?
About an hour and 10 minutes.
Oh, damn, yeah, that is quite long.
I mean,
yeah. I think though, right? Really quickly, one last thing I will say about season 3. I think it's a testament to how good that season is that when you and me have talked about it, we've kind of been all over the place. We've been like, oh yeah, no, we got to talk about Presbeluski and we got to talk about oh yeah, Cutty. We can't forget Cutty. We got to talk about Oman Brother Muzone. And the way that we've talked about it has been messy and chaotic and all over the place. And when I think about Series 3, it is a bit like that. It is kind of messy and chaotic, but it's messy and chaotic in a really structured way, where when you're watching it, there's so much stuff happening, there's so much plot, so much content, but it's always delivered in a way that serves the narrative. You know, it doesn't make leaps, it doesn't make jumps. There's so many things to be considering all the time, so many actions that have reactions to them, but you never feel lost watching season 3.
All the pieces matter, you know.
Yeah, all the pieces matter, and they all fit together so nicely.
Well, I think there's so many, like, we've been interested in all of these different plot threads, and the only way we've been able to talk about them is to take the ones we're interested in and go from start to end talking about them. But the way the show does it is it weaves them all so perfectly that
definitely.
every storyline we've been talking about starts on episode 1 and goes all the way along to the final episode. Almost the only way to talk about it is just to focus on individual plot lines.
Exactly, and we can't help but talk about someone like Cutter, someone like Colvin, without referencing another storyline that kind of weaves through it, like you said, and we kind of get caught on a tangent talking about something else, and we've got to try and bring it back.
Yeah, we suddenly start talking about the end of a plot line we haven't even talked about at the start.
Exactly. And so the way that we talked about it, for anyone listening who hasn't watched Series 3 of The Wire, or any of The Wire, it sounds like a mess, but trust me, when you watch the season of TV for what it is, it fits together so perfectly, and it's just brilliantly constructed. Season 3 is so finely tuned in a way that I don't think any other season of the show actually was.
We didn't even talk about Bodhi, any of those characters, anything there. You know, there's still so much. We didn't really talk about the Western. There's a lot that we just didn't mention because, you know, you should just watch the show yourself. And stop listening to this hour and 11-minute podcast.
But Bodhi will be in Series 4. We'll talk about that.
Oh,
yeah. We'll probably spend most of Series 4 just talking about those 4 kids. They're like our backbone. I think, right. Sorry. One last final bit. Series 4 and Series 3 are neck and neck. But I think the way that Series 3 is maybe like a centimetre, a hair, or as Chris would say, a pube hair more than Series 4 in terms of quality, is the fact that I think Series 4, 90% of what makes it good is Duquan, Michael, Randy, and Naaman. I mean, they carry that season on their backs. They're fucking incredible as foot characters. Whereas I think Series 3 is more well-rounded in the sense that every aspect of it is to such a high quality that if you take any part of it out, then it feels like the season can still function well enough. Whereas I think with Series 4, you take those kids out, it's just a part of the crap in comparison, I think.
I think, I mean, we'll talk about season.
You know that's correct as well, right?
Yeah, but it kind of is the season. Like, I love that if you take two people who've watched season 1 of The Wire and season 4 of The Wire, they're like, oh, I'll just watch this great cop show with Dominic West. Season 4, like, what? I wanted to look up some school kids and how the education system worked. You know, like it's completely different to how the show started. I think
it was really funny when you were watching Series 4 and you told me to watch the show because it's just so different. Like, it's just not the same show.
I love how naturally it doesn't feel jarring. Like, it makes sense for it to be like the education system. I think it's really. I can't wait to talk about season 4, honestly, and remember some things I've forgotten about it, like I did with season 3 when we talked about it.
Yeah.
These are definitely going to be separate episodes.
Definitely. Yeah. No, we can't talk about series.
Even though we've already spoiled like a lot of series. Like, if Dan Cooper's watching along, listen to this episode, we're just talking about when this character dies.
I think it's because I feel that when we did Series 1 and Series 2, we were talking about them both quite closely tied together. I think Series 3 and Series 4 have a similar thing, don't they? Where they're kind of intertwined in a way, whereas Series 5 is just on its own little island doing fuck knows what over there.
Well, the only problem is if we do these as separate episodes, it will be a 2.5. No, if we put them together, it will be 2.5 hours long.
Yeah, we should definitely keep them separate.